The moment I found myself editing family photos with a pair of scissors at my kitchen table, I knew something fundamental had shattered in my world. Vanessa had sent over prints from Madison's birthday party, the ones where I'd been deliberately positioned at the edge of each group shot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now I was cutting myself out entirely before placing the photos in frames. It felt like I was erasing my own existence, frame by frame, smile by smile. It was on that rainy April afternoon, with photo scraps scattered like confetti around me, that I made the decision that would shock everyone, especially my son and his wife. I would reclaim the life they'd so casually dismantled, starting with the house they believed would eventually be theirs. What they didn't know was that the elegant Colonial in Wellesley's most desirable neighborhood wasn't just my home of 40 years. It was my ticket to freedom. My name is Judith Wilson, and until 6 months ago, I was living what my generation of women was trained to consider the perfect life. I'd been a dedicated middle school English teacher for 35 years, before retiring. I'd raised a successful son who'd become a financial analyst. I'd supported my husband Harold through his accounting career and his brief, brutal battle with pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. After his passing, I'd maintained our spacious 4-bedroom Colonial in Wellesley, the same house where we'd hosted countless holiday dinners, graduation celebrations, and quiet Sunday brunches. Then Greg and Vanessa's lease ended unexpectedly when their landlord decided to sell. "It's actually perfect timing," Greg had said during one of his weekend visits, watching me prepare the pot roast I'd made every Sunday since he was a boy. "The rental market is insane right now, and we've been thinking about moving to a better school district for the kids anyway." "I'm sure you'll find something suitable," I'd replied, checking the vegetables roasting alongside the meat. "Mom," we were thinking. He'd hesitated, that familiar look crossing his face, the one he'd worn as a child when asking for something he wasn't certain he deserved. "What if we moved in here temporarily, just until we find the right place to buy? The schools in this neighborhood are excellent, and there's plenty of room." Something in my chest had tightened, but I'd smiled anyway. "That's quite an undertaking, Greg. This is a large house for one person, I'll admit, but it would be good for you too," he'd interrupted, his voice taking on that concerned tone that had become more frequent since Harold's death. "We worry about you being alone here. All these stairs, the yard maintenance, and the kids would love to spend more time with their grandmother." I should have recognized the warning signs. Then, the way he spoke about me rather than to me, the subtle implication that I was becoming incapable. But grief can make you vulnerable in ways you don't immediately recognize. Harold had always been my buffer, my advocate. Without him, I found myself increasingly deferential, desperate to maintain connections with my only family. "I suppose we could discuss it," I'd conceded. Discuss it. As if there had ever been a true discussion. 2 weeks later, they arrived with moving trucks. Not the small rental van I'd expected for a temporary arrangement, but 2 full-sized moving trucks containing every possession they owned. "We decided to give up our storage unit too," Vanessa explained, directing movers toward the staircase. "It just makes financial sense." I stood in my own entryway, watching strangers carry furniture and boxes into rooms where Greg had grown up, where Harold and I had built our life together, where I had expected to live out my remaining years in comfort and familiar surroundings. "We've been talking," Greg said that evening, his arm around Vanessa's waist in a united front. "The master bedroom makes the most sense for us since we need the attached bathroom and closet space for 2 people. We've set up the guest suite in the basement for you. It's actually quite nice with the renovations Harold did a few years ago." The basement. My husband had indeed renovated it, creating a comfortable space for occasional visitors, but it had never been intended as anyone's primary living quarters, least of all mine. "It has its own bathroom and kitchenette," Vanessa added brightly. "Like a little apartment. You'll have privacy when you want it, but you'll be right here when the kids need you. When the kids need you. Not when you want to see them. Not as a cherished family member with her own schedule and preferences. As a convenience, always on. Call. That night, I sat on the edge of the pull-out sofa in what had become my new bedroom, listening to the sounds of my family settling into the spaces above me. Madison's footsteps as she explored what had been my sewing room. Ethan's music, faintly thumping through the ceiling that had never been properly insulated because it hadn't needed to be. The murmur of Greg and Vanessa's voices from my bedroom, from what had been my bedroom, making plans for changes they wanted to make. Changes to the house I still owned. The house whose deed remained solely in my name, a detail they had never bothered to discuss. At first, I tried to make the best of the situation. I arranged my books and photographs around the basement suite, positioned my reading chair near the small ground-level window, and established a small container garden on the narrow strip of concrete outside the basement door. I maintained my routines as best I could: morning tea, daily walks, weekly lunch with retired colleagues. But within a month, the dynamic became crystal clear. I had been relegated to the role of convenient, basement-dwelling grandmother, expected to be available whenever needed, but otherwise invisible. "Judith, could you pick up Ethan after soccer practice? Meeting running long," Vanessa would text. From upstairs. "Mom, Madison forgot her science project. Could you drop it at school?" Greg would call from his office downtown. I always said yes. That's what mothers do, isn't it? That's what I had been taught a good grandmother does. But each request came with less notice. Each assumption of my availability eroded another small piece of my identity. Perhaps the most revealing moment came 2 months after they moved in. I overheard Vanessa giving her parents a tour of the house while I was sorting laundry in the basement. "We kept all the original crown molding," she was saying as they walked across my living room floor. The previous owners maintained the historical details beautifully. Previous owners? As if I were already gone, already relegated to history. "And what about Judith?" I heard her father ask. "Is she comfortable? Down there?" "Oh, she's fine," Vanessa replied dismissively. "Honestly, she's lucky. Most people her age end up in those depressing senior apartments. This way, we handle all the maintenance and she gets to stay in her home. Well, technically it's our home now, but you know what I mean." Her father lowered his voice, but not enough. "Smart move. Getting in before she needed to sell. Property values in this neighborhood are only going up. You've positioned yourselves nicely for the future." Their future, planned on the foundation of my past. Planned with the assumption that I was merely a temporary inconvenience on their path to ownership. The next morning, I found a note taped to the small refrigerator in my basement kitchenette. "Judith, we're having the Morgans over for dinner Saturday. Could you make your apple pie? Vanessa's swamped with work. Thanks." Not even a proper request. No recognition that I might have my own plans, my own life. Just another assumption that my time and efforts were theirs to command. I stared at that sticky note for a long time. Harold would never have treated anyone this way, least of all me. In our 38 years of marriage, he had valued my happiness above everything else. "Promise me you'll have a good life without me, Jude," he'd said in those final weeks, using the nickname only he had ever called me. "Promise me you won't let yourself disappear." Yet here I was, disappearing a little more each day. That afternoon, instead of starting the pie, I walked to the Wellesley Public Library. I needed to think somewhere that wasn't underground, somewhere with high ceilings and natural light. The walk was longer than I remembered. I hadn't been out much since Greg and Vanessa moved in, and my knees ached by the time I arrived. The library had always been one of my favorite places. As an English teacher, I'd brought classes here for research projects, watching young minds discover the power of information and literature. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now I settled into a comfortable chair by the window, letting the sunlight warm my face. Judith? Judith Wilson, is that you? I looked up to see Frank Daniels, owner of the small independent bookstore where I'd purchased reading materials for my classroom for decades. He was carrying a stack of books and smiling broadly. "I haven't seen you in ages," he said, setting his books down at the table beside me. "How have you been since Harold passed? I've missed your recommendations. You always knew exactly which novels would challenge my reading groups." Something about his genuine interest brought a lump to my throat. When was the last time someone had asked about me rather than what I could do for them? "I'm managing," I said finally. "Though things have changed recently. My son and his family moved in with me. Well, not exactly with me. They're upstairs, and I'm in the basement now." I hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out, hanging in the air between us. Frank's smile faded. "They moved you to the basement of your own home?" Put that way, it sounded so much worse, and so much clearer. "It's been renovated," I said quickly, feeling a strange urge to defend them. "It has its own bathroom and everything." "Judith," Frank said gently, "that's not right. Harold wouldn't have wanted that for you." "No, he wouldn't have," I whispered, speaking aloud the thought that had been forming in the back of my mind for weeks. "They've planned their future around inheriting my house, and they don't want to wait anymore." Frank sat with me as I talked, really talked for the first time in months. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes, just listened as I described how quickly I'd been sidelined in my own life. "You know," he said when I finally fell silent, "my brother went through something similar with his son. Moved in to help, then gradually took over. It took him 3 years to work up the courage to leave." "Leave?" The word felt foreign, in my mouth. "But where would I go? This is my home." "Is it?" Frank asked. "Or has it become their home with you as a tenant?" I didn't have an answer for that. When I returned to the house that evening, Greg was waiting at the door. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "We were worried. You didn't answer your phone." I hadn't even realized my phone was in my purse, silenced from my library visit. "I went for a walk," I said, moving past him toward the basement door. "I needed some fresh air." "Mom, you can't just disappear like that. What if something had happened to you?" His concern would have touched me once. Now I wondered how much of it was genuine and how much was fear of losing his convenient childcare arrangement. "I'm fine, Greg. I'm not an invalid, remember?" "Of course not," he backpedaled. "But at your age—" "My age?" I repeated. "I'm 67, not 97. Your father was still running marathons at my age." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Harold had always been the buffer in our relationship, the translator who helped us understand each other. Without him, we'd lost that connection. "Anyway," Greg said, clearing his throat, "Vanessa was wondering about that apple pie for Saturday." "I'll handle it," I said, walking down the basement steps. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house made its usual noises, the furnace kicking on, the ice maker dropping cubes, the faint sound of Greg snoring that reminded me so much of his father. But now they felt like the sounds of strangers, intruders. I got up and opened the small fireproof box where I kept important documents. Inside was the folder Harold had prepared during his last months. Copies of our will, insurance policies, bank accounts, everything neatly labeled in his methodical way. The deed to the house was there too, still solely in my name. Greg had never asked about it, had simply assumed he'd inherit eventually. And why wouldn't he? That had always been the plan. But plans change. People change. I thought about what Frank had said. "Is it still your home?" The answer was becoming clearer by the minute. The next morning, instead of preparing breakfast, For Ethan and Madison, as usual, I got dressed in my best slacks and blouse and walked to the bus stop. I had an appointment to keep, one I'd made from the library the day before. Mrs. Wilson. The real estate agent stood as I entered her office. I'm Patricia Morales. We spoke on the phone yesterday. Yes, I said, sitting down across from her desk. I'd like to know what my house is worth and how quickly it could be sold. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course, but correct. Me if I'm wrong. Didn't you mention that your son and his family are currently living there, without a lease or any legal arrangement? I placed the deed on her desk. The house is solely in my name. My late husband and I paid off the mortgage 12 years ago. Understanding dawned in her eyes. I see. Well, in that case, let me tell you about the current market in Wellesley. It's quite favorable for sellers right now. By the time I left Patricia's office 2 hours later, I had a plan. The house, my house, was worth considerably more than I'd imagined. Wellesley had become one of the most desirable suburbs in the Boston area, with its excellent schools and proximity to the city. 4-bedroom colonials on quarter-acre lots simply didn't come on the market often. I could sell quickly, Patricia assured me, and for enough to secure my future anywhere I chose. As I walked back from the bus stop that afternoon, I saw my home through new eyes, not as the place where my memories lived, but as an asset that could fund my freedom. The Japanese maple. Harold and I had planted on our 15th anniversary was in full autumn glory, red leaves blazing against the white clapboard of the house. I stopped to touch its trunk, feeling the smooth bark under my fingers. I'm sorry, I whispered, but I think it's time for me to go. That evening, as I prepared the apple pie Greg had requested, I heard them all upstairs, Ethan playing video games too loudly, Madison practicing piano somewhat haphazardly, Vanessa on a work call pacing back and forth above my head, and Greg watching sports with the volume turned high. The sounds of a family living their life, building their memories without me. I mixed cinnamon and sugar with mechanical precision, my mind elsewhere. I was already calculating, planning. Patricia had suggested I view properties before listing the house to ensure I had somewhere to go when it sold. Looking at condos doesn't commit you to anything, Patricia had said. But it might help make this real for you. Real? Yes, that's what I needed, to make a new reality for myself, one where I wasn't relegated to the margins of my own life. As I slid the pie into the oven, I made another decision. I wouldn't tell them until everything was finalized. No discussions, no family meetings where my concerns would be dismissed as confusion or ingratitude. No chance for them to talk me out of it, or worse, try to claim I was incompetent to make my own decisions. This would be my move on my terms. The next day, when Vanessa texted asking me to pick up Madison from her piano lesson, I replied that I had an appointment. It wasn't a lie. I was meeting Patricia to look at properties in Riverside Gardens, a community 30 minutes away that catered to active seniors. Can't you reschedule? Vanessa texted back immediately. I have a client meeting I can't miss. I'm sorry, but no, I wrote, feeling a strange thrill at those simple words of refusal. You'll need to make other arrangements. My phone buzzed repeatedly after that, but I turned it off. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was putting myself first. Riverside Gardens wasn't what I expected. Instead of the institutional feel I'd feared, I found an attractive community of condos and townhomes built around a small central park with walking paths and gardens. The units were modern and bright, with wide doorways and accessible features that didn't scream, "Old people live here." Most of our residents are downsizing from family homes, the community manager explained as she showed me a 2-bedroom condo with a balcony overlooking a fountain. They want less maintenance but aren't ready for assisted living. The condo was smaller than I was used to, but everything about it felt open and airy, the opposite of my basement apartment. Large windows let in abundant natural light. The kitchen was compact but efficiently designed. And best of all, there was a community arts center where residents could take classes or work on projects. I used to paint before I started teaching. I told the manager, "I've missed having a creative outlet." "We have several amateur artists here," she replied. "They're always looking for new members for their weekly sessions." As we walked the grounds, I noticed people my age and older, chatting on benches, walking dogs, even playing pickleball on a nearby court. They looked happy, engaged with life. I could be one of them, I realized. Not Judith, the basement grandmother, but Judith, the artist. Judith, the book club member. Judith, the woman with her own life. When I returned to the house that evening, Greg was waiting again, his expression thunderous. "Vanessa had to cancel an important client meeting to pick up Madison," he said accusingly. "What was so important that you couldn't help out?" I hung my sweater in the hall closet before answering. "I had an appointment." "What kind of appointment? Are you sick? Is that what this is about?" The concern in his voice sounded genuine, and for a moment I glimpsed my little boy again. The one who'd cried when I had bronchitis, who'd brought me wildflowers from the yard as get-well presents. "I'm not sick, Greg," I said gently. "I just had something I needed to do." "Well, next time, let us know in advance. We rely on you for the kids." And there it was again. Their needs, their schedules, their convenience. "Greg," I said carefully, "I'm your mother, not your employee. I don't need to submit time-off requests." His face reddened. "That's not what I meant, but we're a family. We help each other." Help each other. Was that what this arrangement was? It didn't feel like mutual aid to me. "Yes, we are family," I agreed, which is why I made that apple pie everyone's enjoying tonight, despite having other things to do. I walked past him to the basement door, suddenly too tired for further discussion. But as I reached for the handle, he spoke again. "Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but Vanessa and I are getting concerned. You seem different, distracted." I turned back to face my son, this man who looked so much like his father, but had somehow missed Harold's most essential lessons about respect and reciprocity. "People change, Greg," I said simply. "Even mothers." As I descended the stairs to my basement room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the quiet satisfaction of standing my ground. It wasn't anger or resentment driving me anymore, but something cleaner, more powerful. Self-respect. That night, I began sorting through my possessions, mentally cataloging what I would take and what I could leave behind. The cherry bedroom, set Harold and I had purchased for our 20th anniversary, too large for a condo. The photo albums and scrapbooks from Greg's childhood, those would come with me. My painting supplies, still stored in bins in the storage area, my books, my mother's china. I made lists, preparing. In the morning, I had another appointment, this time with my bank. The manager, a young woman named Alexis who had handled Harold's estate after his passing, greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Wilson, what can I do for you today?" "I'm selling my house," I said, the words feeling more real each time I spoke them. "And I'll need to arrange for the proceeds to be properly managed." Alexis's professionalism didn't waver, though I could see surprise in her eyes. "Of course, let's discuss your options." By the end of our meeting, I had a clear financial plan. The proceeds from the house would be more than enough to purchase a condo outright, with plenty left for a comfortable retirement. Harold's life insurance policy, which I'd barely touched, provided additional security. "You're in excellent financial shape, Mrs. Wilson," Alexis concluded. "Much better than most of our clients your age." My age. There it was again. But this time it didn't feel like a limitation. Instead, it was simply a fact, one that I was finally addressing on my own terms. As I left the bank, my phone rang. It was Patricia, the real estate agent. "Judith, great news. If you're ready to move quickly, I have potential buyers who want to view the property this weekend. They're relocating for work and need to find something immediately. My heart raced. This weekend? But my family would need to be out during the showing. Yes, Patricia confirmed. I understand that might be complicated given your situation. We could wait for a better time. I thought about the condo at Riverside Gardens, about the art center and the walking paths and the sense of possibility I'd felt there. I thought about the basement room where I'd spend another night if I delayed. No, I said firmly. This weekend is perfect. Can we arrange a private viewing while my son and his family are out? Absolutely. We typically do Saturday morning showings with minimal disruption. Saturday morning, I repeated. My son and his wife take the children to sports activities then. The house will be empty from 9 until at least noon. That's settled then. I hung up and took a deep breath. The wheels were in motion now. There was no going back. Saturday morning arrived with perfect autumn weather, leaves drifting lazily in the gentle breeze. Greg and Vanessa hustled the children through breakfast, barely acknowledging me as they grabbed equipment bags and water bottles. We'll be back around 12:30, Greg called over his shoulder. Ethan has soccer until 11, then Madison has her piano recital rehearsal. Take your time, I replied, hiding the tremble in my voice. I'll be here. As soon as their car pulled away, I texted Patricia. The house is empty. You can bring the buyers now. 20 minutes later, a luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Patricia emerged with a professional-looking couple in their 40s, not unlike Greg and Vanessa, I realized with irony. Judith, this is Dr. and Dr. Peterson. Patricia introduced us at the door. They're very excited to see your beautiful home. The tour went better than I could have hoped. The Petersons loved the original details Harold and I had preserved. The spacious backyard, even the Japanese maple. Our daughter would love climbing that, Dr. Peterson, the wife, remarked. We have a 10-year-old who's part monkey, I swear. They spent extra time in the kitchen, admiring the renovations Harold and I had completed just 4 years ago. The previous owners clearly took pride in this home, Dr. Peterson, the husband, commented. I bit my tongue. I was still the owner, not previous. But soon enough, that would be true. Would you like to see the basement? Patricia asked, glancing at me. We'd discussed whether to show it given its current state as my living quarters. Actually, I said, stepping forward, the basement has been recently renovated as a separate apartment. It has its own entrance from the side yard, which could be perfect for guests or perhaps a home office. I led them down the stairs, feeling strangely detached as they examined what had been my prison for months. Dr. Peterson, the wife, noted the new bathroom fixtures approvingly. Dr. Peterson, the husband, commented on the potential for a music room. They didn't need to know that someone currently slept here, that someone's life had been condensed to these few hundred square feet. After the Petersons left, Patricia stayed behind, her expression hopeful. They're very interested, she said. I wouldn't be surprised if we receive an offer today. Are you sure you're ready for this? Was I ready to reclaim my life? To stand on my own terms? To disappoint the people who had disappointed me so thoroughly? I'm ready, I said. More than ready. Sure enough, the offer came through before Greg and family returned home. It was more than Patricia's suggested asking price. The Petersons were eager to avoid a bidding war in the competitive market. They'd like to close in 30 days, Patricia explained. Is that timeline acceptable? 30 days? 1 month to untangle? Myself from this house, to find the courage to confront my son, to start again at 67. It's perfect, I said, signing the acceptance form. Absolutely perfect. I spent the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation, washing dishes that didn't need washing, reorganizing books that were already alphabetized. Every sound from outside made me jump. A car door, voices on the sidewalk. Certain it was Greg and his family returning early to catch me in the act of selling their inheritance out from under them. But they arrived precisely when expected, bursting through the front door in a flurry of sports equipment and weekend plans. "Ethan scored the winning goal today," Greg announced, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door, the same bowl that had held Harold's keys for 38 years. "The coach says he might make the travel team next season." "That's wonderful," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How was the rehearsal, Madison?" My granddaughter twirled across the living room in demonstration, narrowly missing the coffee table. "Miss Abigail says I'm the best pianist in the recital." "Of course you are," I said, genuinely warmed by her enthusiasm despite everything else. Vanessa swept in last, arms full of grocery bags. "I picked up steaks for dinner," she announced. "Greg's colleagues are stopping by later. I told them you'd make that potato salad they like." Not a question, not even a request, simply an assumption that I was available, willing, and at their disposal. Any other day, I would have nodded and headed for the kitchen. Today, something shifted. "Actually," I said, "I have plans this evening." Vanessa paused halfway to the kitchen, turning back with a bemused expression. "Plans? On Saturday night?" The surprise in her voice stung. Was it so unthinkable that I might have a life beyond their needs? "Yes," I replied simply. "I'm meeting a friend for dinner." "A friend?" Greg appeared from the hallway where he'd been hanging up jackets. "What friend?" I thought of Frank, who'd been so understanding at the library. But the truth was, I hadn't made any actual plans yet. "Helen," I said, naming my former teaching colleague who I hadn't seen in months. "We're meeting at Maple Street Cafe at 6. The lie slipped out easily, surprising me. I'd never been a good liar. Harold could always tell when I was bending. The truth, even about small things like birthday surprises. But Greg just looked confused. "Since when do you go out to dinner? And who's watching the kids?" "I'm watching them," Vanessa interjected, her tone clipped. "Your colleagues will be here by 7. We'll be fine." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence broken only by the sounds of Ethan's video game starting up in the living room. "Well, I should get ready," I said, moving toward the basement door. "Mom," Greg called after me, "is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately." I paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I'm just keeping a dinner date." Downstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed and called Helen. When she answered, I spoke without preamble. "Helen, it's Judith. I need a tremendous favor. Can you meet me for dinner in an hour at Maple Street Cafe? I'll explain everything when I see you." There was a pause, then Helen's warm, familiar laugh. "Judith Wilson, this is the most interesting phone call I've had all month. Of course I'll meet you. I want to hear whatever story makes you sound." This mysterious relief flooded through me. I hadn't realized until that moment how desperately I needed an ally. Someone outside the situation who knew me before I became the convenient basement grandmother. I dressed with unusual care that evening, choosing a blue blouse that Harold had always loved and the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 35th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw glimpses of my younger self, the woman who had walked into Wellesley Middle School each morning with purpose and confidence, who had stood in front of thousands of students over the years and helped shape their futures. When had I forgotten her? I emerged from the basement to find Greg's colleagues, the Morgans, already in the living room. Janet Morgan was fussing over Madison's hair while Richard and Greg discussed some sporting event on the television. Vanessa was in the kitchen looking harried as she sorted through cupboards. "Oh, good, you're up," she said when she spotted me. "Could you start the potato salad before you go? I can't find your recipe anywhere." "I'm sorry, but I need to leave." "Now to meet Helen," I replied, reaching for my purse by the door. "I'm running late as it is." Vanessa's expression tightened. "But Richard and Janet were looking forward to your potato salad." "I'm sure they'll enjoy whatever you make just as much," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. I'll be back later tonight. Don't wait up. As I walked out the front door, my front door, I felt the weight of their stares on my back. But for the first time in months, I was walking taller. Maple Street Cafe was busy for a Saturday evening. Its outdoor patio filled with couples and families enjoying the mild autumn weather. Helen was already at a corner table waving enthusiastically when she spotted me. "Judith!" she exclaimed, standing to embrace me. "You look wonderful. It's been too long." As we settled into our seats, Helen studied me with the shrewd gaze that had made her such an effective English department chair. "Now," she said, "tell me what's going on, and don't leave anything out." The story poured out of me over appetizers and wine. How Greg and Vanessa had moved in, how quickly I'd been relegated to the basement, how they clearly expected to inherit the house, and finally, how I'd secretly arranged to sell it. "The buyers made an offer today," I concluded. "Above asking. Price, 30-day closing." Helen sat back, wine glass forgotten in her hand. "Judith Wilson," she said slowly, "I am in absolute awe. They'll never see it coming, will they? That's the plan." I took a sip of my wine, still marveling at my own audacity. "I haven't figured out exactly how or when to tell them. I'm thinking maybe a week before closing, when it's too late for them to interfere." "And where will you go?" I told her about Riverside Gardens, about the art center and the condo overlooking the fountain. "It sounds perfect for you," Helen said warmly. "But are you sure you're ready to leave the house? All those memories with Harold?" The question gave me pause. Was I ready? The house held 40 years of my life with Harold, every corner filled with his presence. "I think," I said slowly, "that Harold is with me wherever I go. But in that house right now, I don't even feel like myself anymore. How can I honor his memory if I've disappeared?" Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He would be so proud of you, Judith. Standing up for yourself like this." Would he? I wondered aloud. Or would he think I'm being selfish, abandoning our son? "Greg is 42 years old," Helen pointed out dryly, "with a successful career and a family of his own. He'll survive without your free childcare and potato salad." Put that way, it did seem absurd to worry. Yet the guilt lingered, a mother's perpetual shadow. "You haven't abandoned anyone," Helen continued more gently. "They pushed you into a basement and expected gratitude. Harold would never have allowed that, and you know it." She was right. Harold had always been my fiercest defender, stepping in when I was too accommodating for my own good. If he were here, Greg would never have dared suggest such an arrangement. Our conversation shifted to lighter topics as the evening progressed. Former students we'd kept track of, mutual friends from the school, Helen's new hobby of birdwatching. For hours, I wasn't mom or grandma or the previous owner. I was just Judith enjoying dinner with a friend. When I finally returned home shortly after 10 the house was quiet except for the muted sound of the television from the master bedroom, my old bedroom. I slipped down to the basement unnoticed, feeling oddly like a teenager sneaking in past curfew, rather than the homeowner returning to her own property. But soon, I reminded myself as I got ready for bed, I wouldn't be sneaking around anymore. Soon, I would be starting over on my terms. The following week passed in a blur of quiet preparations. I sorted through my possessions during the day while everyone was out, deciding what to keep and what to let go. Each evening, I carried a small bag of important papers or irreplaceable mementos to my car, stashing them in the trunk for safekeeping. I met with Alexis at the bank again to arrange for the proceeds from the house sale to be properly managed. I signed the final paperwork for the condo at Riverside Gardens, using a portion of Harold's life insurance money for the down payment. "The rest will be paid in full once your house closes," the sales manager assured me. "You can move in as early as next week if you'd like." Next week. The timeline was rushing forward faster than I'd anticipated. "I'd like that," I said, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. Very much. Through it all, I maintained my usual routines at home. Preparing breakfast for the children, handling the laundry, keeping the house tidy. To their credit, Greg and Vanessa seemed to notice something was different. They exchanged concerned glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Once I overheard Greg on the phone with someone discussing changes in elderly behavior patterns. The condescension might have angered me once. Now it merely strengthened my resolve. On Wednesday evening, exactly 10 days after accepting the Petersons' offer, I received an email from Patricia. Inspection completed, all contingencies removed. We're clear to close on schedule. It was time to tell them. I considered various approaches, a family meeting, individual conversations, even a letter left on the kitchen counter. In the end, I decided on dinner. One last meal together in the dining room where we'd celebrated so many birthdays, holidays, and milestones. The next morning, I texted Greg and Vanessa. I'd like to make a special dinner tonight, just the four of us. Could you arrange for the children to visit friends? Vanessa replied almost immediately. Is everything okay? Special dinner on a Thursday seems odd. Everything is fine, I wrote back. I just want to talk to you both about something important. I spent the afternoon preparing Harold's favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes, asparagus, and homemade rolls. It seemed fitting somehow, as if his presence might make this easier. Smells amazing in here, Greg commented when he came home from work. What's the occasion? No occasion, I replied, sliding the rolls into the oven. Just thought it would be nice to have a good meal together. Vanessa arrived half an hour later, looking harried. The Johnsons can only keep Madison until 8, she announced, dropping her briefcase on the counter. And Ethan is at Jake's house, but we need to pick him up by 9. That's fine, I assured her. This won't take long. Her eyebrows rose. This? So there is something going on. Let's talk over dinner, I suggested, turning back to the stove. It's almost ready. We gathered around the dining table, the same table where Harold and I had played board games with Greg as a child, where we'd helped him with his homework, where we'd discussed colleges and careers and his engagement to Vanessa. So many important conversations had happened at this table. This would be the last. This looks fantastic, Mom, Greg said, serving himself generously. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's no trouble, I replied. I wanted to do something special before I move out. The words hung in the air as Greg and Vanessa froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Move out? Greg repeated finally. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. I've bought a condo at Riverside Gardens. I'll be moving there next week. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Another piece I'd have to decide whether to take or leave behind. But why? Vanessa asked, her voice unnaturally high. I thought the whole point of us moving in was so you wouldn't have to leave your home. This hasn't felt like my home since I moved to the basement, I said quietly. Greg's face flushed. The basement was your idea, Mom. You said you wanted your own space, remember? Did I? Perhaps in some twisted version of events, I'd agreed to the arrangement to avoid conflict, but I certainly hadn't suggested it. Regardless, I continued, I've made my decision. The condo is lovely. It has a balcony overlooking a fountain, and there's a community arts center where I can paint again. But what about the kids? Vanessa demanded. They need you here. And what about the house? You can't just walk away from the home Dad built for us. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, that brings me to the other thing I needed to tell you. I've sold the house. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. You what? Greg's voice was dangerously quiet. I've sold the house, I repeated. To a lovely couple, both doctors. They have a 10-year-old daughter who will love climbing the maple tree in the backyard. You can't do that, Vanessa spluttered. We live here now. We have rights. You don't, actually, I said, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. Your names aren't on the deed, and we never established a formal rental agreement. Legally, the house is mine to sell. Greg pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You're not thinking? Clearly, Mom. You can't just sell a house out from under your own family. The sale closes in 20 days, I continued, ignoring his outburst. The new owners will take possession immediately after. I wanted to give you enough notice to find a new place. 3 weeks? Vanessa's voice rose to a near shriek. You expect us to find a house in 3 weeks in this market, with 2 children? In school? I met her gaze steadily. You managed to sell your previous home and move in here within a month. I have faith in your abilities. Greg began pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Harold that my heart ached despite everything. This isn't right, Mom. Dad would never have wanted this. The house was supposed to stay in the family. We were supposed to inherit it someday. Someday, I repeated. Not now. Not while I'm still very much alive and capable of making my own decisions. Are you, though? Greg turned to face me, his expression hardening. Because this doesn't sound like you at all. This sounds like someone who's confused. Maybe even... Don't, I warned, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Don't suggest I'm incompetent just because I'm doing something you don't like. Then explain it to us, Vanessa pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. Why now? Why like this? If you weren't happy with the arrangement, why didn't you say something? I looked at her incredulously. Would you have listened? When have either of you asked what I wanted since you moved in? When have you treated me as anything other than a convenient, basement-dwelling caretaker? That's not fair, Greg protested. We gave you your own space, your own bathroom, your own kitchenette. In the basement, I finished for him. While you took over the home I built with your father, moved my things without asking, and treated me like a tenant in my own house. We were trying to help you, Vanessa insisted. You were all alone. After Harold died. We thought you'd be grateful for the company, for being able to see the kids every day. Grateful, I repeated. Yes, that's exactly what I was supposed to be, wasn't it? Grateful for being pushed aside. Grateful for being available whenever you needed childcare. Grateful for being allowed to stay in the house I've owned for 40 years. Tom collapsed back into his chair, looking stunned. Is that really how you see it? That we've been taking advantage of you? Haven't you? No one spoke for several long moments. The food grew cold on our plates, the special dinner forgotten. In the weight of revelations. What if we change things? Greg finally asked, his voice smaller now. What if we swap? You take the master bedroom back and we move downstairs. Or we could convert the dining room into a main floor bedroom for you. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve selling the house. For a fleeting moment, I considered it. Perhaps things could be different. Perhaps we could find a new arrangement that respected my position in the household. But then I remembered the Petersons' daughter who would climb the Japanese maple. I remembered the condo at Riverside Gardens with its view of the fountain and its promise of a fresh start. I remembered the art center waiting for my paintbrushes. The house is sold, I said firmly. The decision is made. You can still back out, Vanessa argued. Pay a penalty, break the contract, whatever it takes. You can't do this to us, to the children. It's cruel. Cruel? I shook my head slowly. Was it cruel when you moved me to the basement of my own home? Was it cruel when you referred to me as the previous owner while giving your parents a tour? Was it cruel when you made plans for your future based on my death? Vanessa flinched as if I'd slapped her. I never said anything about Your death? You didn't have to. It was implied in every decision, every assumption about your house, every conversation about when the house is yours. Greg placed his head in his hands. Mom, please. This is our home now, too. The kids are settled in school. We've made renovations. We've put down roots here. Roots, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. In less than 6 months? You can't just uproot all of that because you're feeling slighted. Slighted, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Is that what you think this is about? Hurt feelings? Then what is it about? He demanded. Revenge? Punishment? Making us suffer because you weren't getting enough attention? The accusation stung, but I took a deep breath before responding. It's about respect, Greg. It's about having the agency to make my own decisions, about my own life and property. It's about remembering who I am beyond being your mother and the children's grandmother. And who is that exactly? Vanessa asked, her tone somewhere between bitter and genuinely curious, because the Judith I thought I knew would never turn her back on family like this. I'm still figuring that out, I admitted. But I know. I'm someone who deserves better than a basement. The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. Greg went to answer it, his movements stiff with anger. A moment later, he returned with a middle-aged couple I didn't recognize. Mom, he said coldly. These people say they're here to measure for window treatments. Care to explain? The Petersons stood awkwardly in the dining room doorway, looking uncomfortable. We're so sorry to intrude, Dr. Peterson, the wife, said, quickly. The agent said it would be okay to stop by this evening. We can come back another time. I rose from my chair, smoothing my skirt. It's fine. You're not intruding. This is Dr. and Dr. Peterson, I explained to Greg and Vanessa. They're the new owners. The look on Greg's face shifted from disbelief to betrayal. You invited them here tonight? They're on a tight schedule with their relocation, I explained. And I thought it might be good for you to meet them, to know who will be caring for the house next. Unbelievable, Vanessa muttered, pushing away from the table. I can't do this right now. She stormed out of the room, brushing past the Petersons without acknowledging them. Greg remained frozen in place, his expression unreadable. Perhaps we should come back another time, Dr. Peterson, the husband, suggested, clearly sensing the tension. No need, I said, gesturing for them to enter. Let me show you the windows you were asking about. The living room gets beautiful morning light. I guided them through the house, pointing out features and answering questions while acutely aware of Greg following several paces behind, silent and seething. The Petersons, to their credit, maintained polite professionalism despite the obvious awkwardness of the situation. When they finally left 45 minutes later, promising to return with their contractor next week, Greg confronted me in the foyer. How could you do this? He demanded, his voice breaking. Parade those strangers through our home, showing off Dad's woodwork, Mom's garden, like none of it matters to you anymore. It matters, I said softly. It will always matter. But the memories aren't in the walls, Greg. They're in here. I touched my heart gently, and I'll take them with me wherever I go. This isn't right, he insisted, though some of the fight seemed to have gone out of him. There has to be another way. There isn't, I said firmly. The decision is made. That night, alone in my basement room, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since the whole process began. Not out of regret. I remained certain of my choice, but out of grief for the family I'd thought we were, for the son who couldn't see what had been done to me, for the relationship that might never recover from this rupture. The next morning, I woke to unusual silence from upstairs. No thumping footsteps, no children's voices, no kitchen sounds. When I finally ventured up to make coffee, I found a note on the counter in Greg's handwriting. Staying at Vanessa's sister's. House until we figure things out. We'll be back tomorrow to start packing. The house felt eerily empty without them, a preview of what was to come once I moved out as well. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar surfaces. The banister Harold had refinished by hand. The window seat where I'd read stories to Greg. The kitchen counters where I'd taught him to bake bread. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Was I throwing away my last connection to Harold? To our life together? As if in answer, my phone chimed with a text from Patricia. Just checking in. The closing is on track for the 15th. How are you holding up? I looked around the empty house one more time, then typed my reply. I'm ready for the next chapter. Later that day, I called Frank. We'd been meeting regularly for coffee since our first encounter at the library, and he'd become a trusted sounding board during this transition. They didn't take it well, I told him, recounting the previous night's confrontation. Not that I expected them to. Did you expect them to? He asked gently. No, I admitted. But I hoped. I don't know what I hoped. That they might understand. That they might see it from my perspective. They're in shock, Frank suggested. Give them time. Right now they're only seeing what they're losing, not what you've gained. And what have I gained exactly? Your dignity, he said simply. Your independence. Your right to choose your own path. Put that way, it seemed worth whatever price I might have to pay in family discord. I'm meeting with a moving company tomorrow, I told him. They'll pack and move everything I'm taking with me. The rest will go to charity or stay with the house. Do you need help sorting through things? He offered. My sister found it helpful to have someone objective when she was downsizing. His kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. That would be wonderful, I managed to say. There's so much history in this house, so many decisions to make. I'll be there first thing tomorrow, he promised. We'll tackle it together. When I hung up, I felt lighter somehow. Perhaps it was knowing I had support during this difficult transition. Perhaps it was simply the relief of having my decision out in the open at last. The house around me was still the same walls that had watched Greg grow from infant to man, the same rooms where Harold and I had built our life together. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was prioritizing my own needs, my own future. It wasn't selfishness, I decided. It was self-preservation. And at 67, I was finally learning that the two were not the same thing at all. I spent the afternoon making lists. What to take, what to leave, what to give away. When I reached Harold's things, I hesitated. We'd left his clothes untouched after his death, his reading glasses still on the bedside table, his favorite coffee mug in the cabinet. Moving would mean finally confronting these remnants, deciding which physical reminders of him would come with me to my new life. In the master bedroom closet, now filled with Greg and Vanessa's clothes, I found a small section of Harold's suits still hanging at the back. I ran my fingers over the familiar fabrics, remembering how handsome he'd looked in each one. Would he understand what I was doing? Would he approve? I miss you, I whispered to the empty room. I wish you were here to tell me I'm doing the right thing. As if in answer, my gaze fell on a small wooden box on the high shelf. Harold's keepsake box. The one where he'd kept ticket stubs from our dates, dried flowers from anniversaries, small mementos from our life together. I reached for it, surprised that Greg and Vanessa had left it undisturbed. Inside, beneath the expected souvenirs, I found an envelope addressed to me in Harold's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a letter dated just weeks before his death. My dearest Judith, if you're reading this, it means you're finally cleaning out my things. Knowing you, it's probably been months or even years since I've been gone. You always were sentimental about holding on to the past. But here's what I want you to know. The past is just memory. The future, even without me, is still yours to create. Don't stay frozen in time out of loyalty to what we had. Don't let our home become a museum to a life that's ended. Whatever you decide to do, sell the house, travel the world, adopt 17 cats, know that you have my blessing. The only promise I want you to keep is the one about living a good life without me. All my love, always, Harold. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. Even from beyond, Harold understood what I needed better than my own son did. He'd given me permission to move forward, to remake my life without him. In that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. I was doing exactly what Harold would have wanted. Choosing life, choosing myself, refusing to disappear into the background of someone else's story. When Greg and Vanessa returned the next day, subdued and red-eyed, I met them with newfound certainty. "I've arranged for movers to come next Tuesday," I told them. "I'll be taking only what fits in the condo. You're welcome to anything I leave behind, or you can sell it with the house." "So this is really happening," Greg said flatly. "You're really going through with it?" "Yes," I replied simply. "I am." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the gulf between us seemingly unbridgeable. "Fine," he said finally. "We've found an apartment we can lease short-term while we look for a house. We'll be out by the closing date." "Thank you," I said, genuinely relieved that they weren't going to fight me further. "Don't thank me," he replied bitterly. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't have a choice." As they headed upstairs to begin packing, Vanessa paused on the landing. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm sorry if we made you feel less than welcome in your own home. That was never our intention." It wasn't exactly an admission of wrongdoing, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that perhaps they hadn't handled things as well as they might have. "I know," I said, because in my heart I did. They hadn't acted out of malice, just selfishness and convenience. They'd seen an opportunity and taken it, never stopping to consider how it might feel from my perspective. The next 2 weeks passed, in a whirlwind of boxes and decisions. Frank came daily, helping me sort through 40 years of accumulation with patience and insight. "Keep only what brings you joy or serves a purpose in your new life," he advised, quoting some organizational guru he'd read. "The rest is just weight holding you back." I discovered he was right. With each box packed or discarded, I felt lighter, more mobile, more ready for whatever came next. Greg and Vanessa worked around us, packing their own belongings with minimal interaction. The children, confused by the sudden upheaval, asked questions I wasn't equipped to answer. "Why are we moving, Grandma?" Madison wanted to know. "Don't you like living with us anymore?" "It's not about liking or not liking," I tried to explain. "Sometimes adults need different things as they get older. I need a place that's just for me, and your mom and dad need a place that's just for your family." "But we are your family too," Ethan pointed out with a child's perfect logic. "Yes," I agreed, hugging him close. "And we always will be, no matter where we live." I wasn't sure if he believed me. I wasn't entirely sure if I believed myself, but I hoped that with time the rift might heal, that Greg might come to understand why I'd needed to make this stand, why I'd chosen my independence over the comfort of the familiar. 3 days before the closing, I stood in my nearly empty basement room, surveying what remained. Most of my possessions were already at the condo, arranged in my new space with Frank's helpful eye for design. What little was left would go in my car tomorrow for the final trip. The house above me was similarly emptied, Greg and Vanessa having moved most of their things to their temporary apartment. They'd be back tomorrow for the last load, and then that would be it. The end of the Wilson family's time in this house. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress, feeling strangely peaceful. The anger that had driven my decision had faded, replaced by a quiet certainty that I was doing what was right for me. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect and the desire for a life that was truly mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "How's it going over there? Need help with anything tomorrow?" I smiled at his thoughtfulness. "All under control," I replied. "But thank you. Maybe dinner tomorrow at the new place? I actually have a dining table now." His response came quickly. "I'd like that very much." I set the phone down, surprised by the small flutter of anticipation I felt. Was this a date? At my age, after everything? Perhaps it was. Or perhaps it was simply two friends sharing a meal. Either way, it was one more step into my new life. One more choice made freely on my own terms. As I prepared for my last night in the house Harold and I had shared for so long, I felt his presence more strongly than I had in months. Not as a ghost haunting the walls, but as a voice in my heart urging me forward. "The future is still yours to create," he'd written. And finally, I was ready to begin. The morning of my departure dawned with unexpected brightness for an autumn day. Sunlight streamed through the small basement window, casting long rectangles of light across the bare floor. I'd slept fitfully, waking several times to the unfamiliar echoes of an almost empty house and the weight of what today would bring. My phone alarm chimed at 6:30, an old habit from teaching days that I'd never broken. I silenced it and lay still for a moment, listening to the house. No footsteps overhead, no children's voices, no kitchen sounds. Greg and Vanessa had taken the kids to the apartment yesterday after moving the last of their essential belongings. They'd return later today for final items, but for now, I had the house to myself. I rose and made my way upstairs for the last time as the owner of this home. The kitchen, stripped of family photos and personal touches, felt strangely impersonal. More like a model home than the place where I'd prepared thousands of meals over the decades. Only the old coffee maker remained on the counter, left for this final morning. As the coffee brewed, I walked through each room one last time. The living room, where Harold and I had decorated Christmas trees and helped Greg with science projects. The dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations. The upstairs bedrooms where I'd read bedtime stories and soothed nightmares. Every corner held memories, but I was surprised to find they didn't weigh me down as I'd feared. Instead, they felt like gentle acknowledgments of a life well lived, chapters complete, not abandoned. In what had been our master bedroom, I opened the closet one final time. Greg and Vanessa had cleared their things, leaving only the few items of Harold's I hadn't yet decided what to do with. I touched each suit, each tie, remembering specific moments. His nervousness before job interviews, his pride at Greg's graduation, the way he'd asked my opinion before important presentations. "It's time," I said softly, to him and to myself. With careful movements, I selected just one suit jacket, the tweed one with leather elbow patches he'd worn when he taught weekend accounting seminars at the community college. The rest I left for donation, knowing someone else would give them new purpose. Back downstairs, I poured coffee into my travel mug and called Frank. He'd insisted on helping with the final move, despite my protests that the remaining items would fit in my car. "I'm heading out now," he answered on the first ring. "Need I? Anything else before I come over? Last-minute boxes? Breakfast?" "Just your company," I replied, surprised by the ease with which the words came. "Everything else is ready." While waiting for Frank, I sat on the bottom porch step, cradling my coffee and watching the neighborhood come alive. Mrs. Sullivan from across the street collected her newspaper in a floral robe. The Walker boys raced their bikes down the sidewalk, late for something as usual. The Hendersons' collie barked enthusiastically at a passing squirrel. For 40 years, this had been the backdrop of my life. Familiar, comfortable, predictable. Now I was voluntarily stepping into the unknown. A car pulled into the driveway, and Frank emerged with 2 paper bags from Maple Street Cafe and a bouquet of autumn chrysanthemums. "Moving day breakfast," he announced, climbing the steps to join me. "And flowers for your new home." The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed, accepting both offerings. I wasn't expecting a proper send-off. He smiled, settling beside me on the step. "This is a big day, Judith. A brave one. It deserves recognition." We ate pastries and drank coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood fully awaken. Frank didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence with unnecessary chatter. He simply sat companionably as I absorbed these final moments. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked eventually, noting my contemplative mood. "Not exactly," I replied, considering the question carefully. "More like acknowledging that endings are always a little sad, even when they're the right thing." He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Ready whenever you are." We loaded the last few boxes and bags into our respective cars. My final sweep of the house confirmed what I already knew. There was nothing left that I couldn't bear to leave behind. At the front door, I paused only briefly before locking it and placing the key under the mat, where Patricia would find it later to give to the Petersons at closing. Frank followed me as I drove across town to Riverside Gardens. The 15-mile journey felt symbolic somehow, not far in distance but immeasurable in significance. With each mile, the tension in my shoulders eased a little more, as if I were physically leaving behind the weight of expectations and obligations that had defined me for so long. The community looked even more welcoming than I remembered. Autumn, flowers blooming in carefully tended beds along the entrance drive. Several residents waved as we pulled into the visitor parking area near my new condo. "Mrs. Wilson!" The community manager, Dorothy, hurried over as I emerged from my car. "Welcome home. We've been looking forward to your arrival." Home. The word resonated differently now, not tied to a specific structure or history, but to something more essential. A place where I belonged, where I was valued, where I could be fully myself. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by her enthusiasm. "I'm looking forward to settling in." With Frank's help, the last of my belongings were quickly carried inside. The condo, already furnished with the items delivered earlier in the week, looked invitingly arranged. Sunlight poured through the balcony doors, illuminating the open living area. The kitchen, though smaller than what I was accustomed to, gleamed with new appliances and clean countertops. "What do you think?" Frank asked, setting down the final box. "Does it feel right?" I walked slowly through the space, running my fingers along the back of my reading chair, now positioned perfectly by the window overlooking the fountain. Harold's landscape paintings, carefully selected from our collection, adorned walls that had never known us as a couple, but somehow didn't feel alien. "It feels like possibility," I said finally, "like a blank page rather than the end of a book." Frank smiled. "That's a good way of looking at it." Dorothy returned with a welcome basket and a folder of information. "We have a community dinner, tonight at 6 in the clubhouse," she explained. "It's nothing formal, just a chance for new residents to meet their neighbors. I hope you'll join us." After she left, Frank helped me unpack the last few boxes while I arranged Harold's tweed jacket in the closet beside my clothes. The physical work of settling in, hanging pictures, arranging books, finding homes for cherished objects, anchored me in the present moment, preventing melancholy from taking hold. "Will you come to the dinner with me tonight?" I asked as we broke down the empty boxes. "I'm not sure I'm ready to walk into a room full of strangers alone." "I'd be honored," he replied, his expression warming. "Though I suspect you won't need moral support for long. You have a gift for connecting with people, Judith. Always have." The compliment caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had seen me, really seen me, as an individual with qualities and capabilities beyond my role as wife, mother, grandmother? That's kind of you to say, I murmured, suddenly self-conscious. It's not kindness, just observation. He checked his watch. I should head out and let you rest before tonight, unless there's anything else you need help with. You've done more than enough, I assured him. I can't thank you properly for all your support these past weeks. You don't need to thank me, he said simply. Friends help each other through difficult transitions. That's all this is. But as he left with a promise to return at 5:30, I wondered if that was really all it was. The quiet anticipation I felt at the thought of seeing him again suggested something more, something I wasn't quite ready to name, but couldn't entirely dismiss either. Alone in my new home, I moved from room to room, making small adjustments, shifting a lamp, rearranging pillows, finding the perfect spot for Harold's reading glasses, which I'd kept as a tangible reminder of our shared love of literature. With each adjustment, the space became more mine, reflecting not just who I had been, but who I might become. My phone rang just after 3. Greg's name appeared on the screen, causing a momentary tightness in my chest. We'd barely spoken since the night of the revelation, our interactions limited to practical matters of moving and property division. I took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Greg. Mom. His voice sounded strained, formal. We've finished. At the house. I wanted to let you know that everything's been cleared out, except for the items you marked to be donated. Thank you, I replied, matching his businesslike tone. The charity will pick those up tomorrow. A pause stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us seemed ready to say. So, he finally continued, you're at the new place now? Yes, just finished unpacking the last few things. And it's nice? The halting question revealed a glimpse of the son I knew, the one who, despite everything, still cared about my well-being. It's lovely, I said, my voice softening. The balcony overlooks a fountain, and there's an arts center where I can paint again. That's good. Another pause. Listen, Mom, about everything that happened. Greg, I interrupted gently. We don't need to do this now. It's been an emotional time for everyone. Maybe we all need a little space to adjust to the new normal. He sighed, a sound heavy with unresolved feelings. Maybe you're right. I hesitated, then asked, how are the children doing with all this? They're adjusting. Madison keeps asking when they can see your new place. The mention of my granddaughter sent a pang through my heart. In the chaos of the move, I'd had little time with them, and I worried about how they were processing all the changes. Anytime, I said quickly. They're always welcome. You all are, once you're ready. Maybe next weekend, after everyone's had a chance to settle. I'd like that. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony watching the fountain's water catch the late afternoon sunlight. The conversation with Greg hadn't resolved anything, but it felt like the beginning of something. A tentative bridge across the chasm that had opened between us. At precisely 5:30, Frank arrived for the community dinner, looking more polished than usual in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt. I'd made an effort as well, wearing a burgundy dress I'd purchased just last week, my first new outfit in longer than I cared to admit. You look beautiful, he said simply as I opened the door. Thank you. I felt a blush rising to my cheeks. So do you. Handsome, I mean. He offered his arm with an old-fashioned gallantry that made me smile. Shall we go meet your new neighbors? The community clubhouse was a short walk from my condo, situated on a rise overlooking the gardens. Inside, about 30 residents had gathered for dinner, their conversations creating a pleasant buzz of social energy. Dorothy spotted us immediately and hurried over to make introductions. Everyone, this is Judith Wilson, our newest resident. In Building C, she announced. Judith was an English teacher for 35 years before retiring. Several people approached, offering handshakes and warm greetings. A tall woman with silver hair styled in an elegant bob stepped forward. "I'm Catherine Miller, Building B," she said, her handshake firm and confident. "Former high school principal, so we speak the same language. Come sit with James and me." We saved the good seats with the garden view. Before I knew it, Frank and I were seated at a table with Catherine and her husband James, along with another couple, Michael and Eleanor Barnes, who had moved to Riverside Gardens 8 months earlier. "Best decision we ever made," Eleanor confided as we filled our plates from the buffet. "Our kids thought we were crazy to leave the family home, but I've never felt more liberated." "Our son had already mentally redecorated our living room," Michael added with a wry smile. "He was not pleased when we sold to strangers instead." Their experience so mirrored my own that I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about the circumstances of my move. Rather than judgment, I received understanding nods and knowing smiles. "Classic basement grandmother syndrome," Catherine declared. "James's mother went through the same thing with his sister. Moved her to the guest room, then gradually took over everything else." "What did she do?" I asked, curious about another woman's solution to a similar situation. "Bought an RV and spent 3 years traveling the country," James chuckled. "Sent postcards from every national park. Said it was the best revenge, living well while they figured out their own childcare." The conversation flowed easily throughout. Dinner, touching on books, local activities, the upcoming community art show, and a dozen other topics. Frank participated fully, his warmth and wit earning approving glances from my new acquaintances. As coffee and dessert were served, Catherine leaned closer. "Your friend here is quite charming," she murmured. "How long have you been seeing each other?" "Oh, we're not," I began automatically, then paused, unsure how to characterize our relationship. "Frank has been a wonderful support through my move. We're friends." Catherine's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by my explanation, but she didn't press the issue. "Well, he seems lovely, and it's never too late for new beginnings, you know." Her words stayed with me as the evening progressed. New beginnings. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been seeking? Not just a new home, but a new way of living, new connections, new possibilities for what my remaining years might hold. As the gathering wound down, several residents invited me to upcoming activities: a book club meeting, a walking group that circled the gardens each morning, an intermediate watercolor class held in the Community Arts Center. Each invitation represented a thread in what could become a new social fabric, one I would weave myself rather than having it imposed upon me. Walking back to my condo with Frank under a sky turning indigo with approaching night, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "You were right," I told him, our arms brushing occasionally as we strolled along the garden path. "I didn't need moral support after all. They're a welcoming group." "I told you," he replied, sounding pleased, "though I'm glad I came anyway. I enjoyed meeting them all, especially Catherine. She reminds me of you." "Of me? How so?" "Direct, observant, not afraid to speak her mind." He glanced at me with a small smile. "Qualities I admire greatly." We reached my door, and the familiar end-of-evening awkwardness descended. That moment of uncertainty about how to conclude our time together. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," I said, keys in hand but making no move to use them. It made everything easier. "It was my pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of trying that new breakfast place on River Street tomorrow. Would you like to join me around 9? Another invitation, another choice that was entirely mine to make. "I'd love to," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. His smile widened. "Good night then, Judith. Sleep well in your new home." After he left, I moved through the darkened condo, turning on lamps and adjusting thermostats. Small rituals of claiming space. Through the balcony doors, the fountain gleamed silver in the moonlight, a view I now owned as surely as the walls around me. I readied myself for bed in the unfamiliar bathroom, the new routines feeling strange but not unwelcome. In the bedroom, I'd placed a photograph of Harold on the nightstand, one from our 35th anniversary trip to Maine, his face tanned and laughing as he pointed out a distant sailboat. "Well," I said to his image as I slipped beneath covers that still smelled of the store, "I did it. New place, new start. You'd laugh at how nervous I was about that dinner tonight, but you'd be proud too, I think." Sleep came more easily than I'd expected, deep and dreamless in my new sanctuary. The next week unfolded in a pleasant rhythm of small discoveries and establishing routines. I learned which cabinet drawer stuck slightly, which neighbor walked their dog at precisely 7:30. Each morning, which chair on the balcony caught the morning sun just right for reading. Frank and I fell into an easy pattern of shared meals and activities. Breakfast at the new place on River Street, excellent scones, mediocre coffee, an art exhibition at the local gallery, interesting but overpriced, a community concert in the Riverside Gardens Pavilion, enthusiastic, if not entirely polished. We didn't label what was developing between us, but I found myself looking forward to his calls, arranging my schedule around our plans, wondering what he might think of. A book I was reading or a view I'd discovered on my morning walks. Meanwhile, my social circle at Riverside Gardens expanded rapidly. Catherine introduced me to the art group, where I secured a spot in the intermediate watercolor class. Michael and Eleanor invited me to join their weekly bridge game, patiently refreshing my rusty skills. The morning walking group welcomed me, as if I'd always been a member. Each interaction reinforced what I was gradually accepting: that identity could be fluid, that I could be more than the roles that had defined me for decades, that Judith existed separately from Mom and Grandma, and Harold's widow. The Friday before Greg's planned visit with the children, I received a call from Patricia, the real estate agent. "Just wanted to let you know everything went perfectly at closing," she reported cheerfully. "The Petersons are delighted with the house, and the full amount has been transferred to your account as instructed." "Thank you for everything," I replied. A weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying suddenly lifted. It was done. The house was truly no longer mine. "How are you settling into Riverside Gardens?" she asked. "I've had several clients very happy there." "It feels right," I told her, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. More right than I expected, actually. After we hung up, I walked through my condo, my home, with fresh eyes. In just a week, I'd already made it mine in ways large and small. Harold's landscape paintings harmonized with new watercolors I'd purchased at the gallery. My mother's quilt draped across the modern sofa. Books filled shelves in an order that made sense only to me. It wasn't the house on Maple Street with its 4 decades of memories. It was something else entirely. A space that reflected not who I had been, but who I was becoming. The thought was still with me the next morning as I prepared for Greg's visit. I'd baked snickerdoodles, remembering that Ethan and Madison preferred them to chocolate chip, and arranged a vase of fresh flowers on the dining table. Small gestures of welcome, of continuity amid change. At precisely 11 km, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath before answering, uncertain what to expect. The children rushed in first, exclaiming over the view and the fancy elevator and the huge fountain they'd spotted on the way in. Greg and Vanessa followed more hesitantly, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and lingering discomfort. The awkwardness was palpable as I invited them in, offering cookies and showing the children around the small space. "It's really nice, Mom," Greg said finally, standing by the balcony doors. "Much nicer than I pictured." "What did you picture?" I couldn't help asking. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I don't know. Something institutional, I guess." It suits you." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the olive branch for what it was. "I'm happy here." Vanessa hovered near the kitchen, examining photographs I'd arranged on a side table. "You have new frames," she observed. "I don't recognize these." "I bought them last week," I explained. A fresh start seemed to call for new frames, too. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Makes sense." The visit proceeded with stilted conversation and careful politeness. But beneath the surface tension, I sensed a gradual thawing. Greg asked about the arts center. Vanessa complimented the view. The children, oblivious to adult undercurrents, begged to explore the grounds. "Can we go see the fountain, Grandma, please?" Madison tugged at my hand, her enthusiasm impossible to resist. "Of course," I agreed. "We can all go." As we walked the paths of Riverside Gardens, I found myself pointing out features with unexpected pride. The pavilion where morning yoga classes were held, the clubhouse where I'd joined the book club, the arts center where my watercolor class met. "You've learned a lot about this place in just a week," Greg observed as the children ran ahead to examine the fountain. "I've been exploring," I replied. "It's a friendly community. Easy to feel at home." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm still angry, about how everything happened with the house." "I know," I said, "but I'm trying to understand." He kicked at a pebble on the path. "Vanessa and I have been talking. A lot about what you said that night, about how we made you feel." I waited, giving him space to continue. "We didn't see it," he admitted finally. "How much we were taking for granted, how much we were expecting from you without asking. I'm not saying we would have done anything differently with the house. We still needed a bigger place, and it made financial sense. But we could have approached it differently, respected your position more." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, which from my proud son was significant progress. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "And for what it's worth, I could have communicated better too, instead of going along with everything until I exploded." He almost smiled. "You did explode pretty spectacularly. I learned from the best. You had some legendary tantrums as a toddler." This time he did smile, a genuine one that reached his eyes. "So I've been told." We walked in more comfortable silence for a while, watching the children explore their new surroundings with uninhibited curiosity. "By the way," Greg said eventually, "we found a house not as nice as—" He paused, visibly correcting himself. "The old one, I mean, but in the same school district. We close next month." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "I'm glad it worked out so quickly." "Yeah, well, real estate moves fast these days." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, once we're settled, maybe you could come for dinner sometime, if you want to." The invitation, hesitant as it was, represented the first real step toward rebuilding our relationship. "I'd like that very much," I replied. When they left a few hours later, the children extracted promises that I would attend Madison's piano recital and Ethan's science fair the following weekend. Vanessa hugged me briefly, still awkward but making an effort. Greg lingered after they started toward the car. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you really okay here?" The question seemed to come from the little boy who'd always worried about me. When Harold traveled for work, who'd bring me wilting dandelions and ask if I was lonely. "I'm more than okay," I assured him. "I'm beginning to thrive." He nodded, accepting my answer even if he didn't fully understand it yet. "Good. That's good." As I watched them drive away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the visit had gone better than feared, sadness for the closeness we'd lost, hope that we might build something new from the ashes of resentment and misunderstanding. I was still standing on the walkway, lost in thought, when Frank approached from the direction of the main entrance. "I saw a family leaving," he said, joining me. "Was that Greg and the children?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Their first visit. It went better than expected." "I'm glad to hear it." He studied my expression. "Are you all right?" I am, I realized, the words feeling true and solid. Actually, I'm just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. A month ago, I was living in a basement, feeling invisible and taken for granted. And now? And now? He prompted gently. I gestured around us, at the community I was quickly coming to love, at the future spreading before me like an open road. Now I'm here, starting over at 67. Who would have thought it possible? I would have, Frank said simply. You've always had more strength than you realized, Judith. All you needed was the chance to use it. As we walked back toward my condo, discussing plans for the afternoon, I reflected on his words. Strength. Yes, that's what I'd found in the midst of loss and change and difficult choices. Not the strength to endure silently, which I'd always had in abundance, but something different. The strength to assert my own worth, to claim my own space, to write my own story. The chapter of my life spent in the house on Maple Street had ended. The basement grandmother was gone. In her place stood a woman who was only beginning to discover who she might become. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely excited to find out. Autumn melted into winter with a gentleness that matched my evolving life at Riverside Gardens. By mid-December, my watercolor skills had improved enough for the instructor to suggest I consider submitting work to the community's annual art show. In January, "You have a natural eye for composition," she told me after class one day, examining my painting of the fountain at sunset. "And your color sense is excellent. Have you ever shown your work before?" "Never," I admitted. "I stopped painting when I started teaching. There just wasn't time." "Well, there's time now," she said firmly. "Think about it. The submission deadline is the end of the month." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. During my basement days, I'd become so accustomed to making myself small, to minimizing my presence, that the thought of deliberately putting my work, and by extension myself, on display felt almost transgressive. That evening, I mentioned the art show to Frank as we prepared dinner in my kitchen. We'd fallen into the habit of cooking together several nights a week, my smaller kitchen somehow more conducive to companionable meal preparation than the spacious one I'd left behind. "Of course you should enter," he said without hesitation, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. "Your work is wonderful. I particularly like that series you did of the changing trees." "You're biased," I pointed out, stirring the risotto. "Guilty as charged." His smile warmed me more than the steam rising from the pot. "But that doesn't mean I'm wrong." Later, as we ate at my small dining table, the one I'd selected specifically for this space rather than bringing anything from the old house, Frank brought up another invitation. "The bookstore is hosting a holiday open house next Friday evening," he said, refilling our wine glasses. "Local authors, music, refreshments. I'd love for you to come as my guest." "Your guest?" I repeated, something in his tone catching my attention. He met my eyes steadily. "My date, if you're comfortable with that terminology." I felt a flutter of anticipation mingled with nervousness. We'd been spending so much time together, sharing meals, attending community events, even holding hands during our evening walks. But neither of us had put a name to what was developing between us. "I believe I am comfortable with that," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice despite my racing heart. "Very comfortable, in fact." His smile brightened the entire room. "Good. That's settled then." The holiday season brought new rituals and unexpected joys. The Riverside Gardens community celebrated with a tree lighting ceremony, a choral concert in the pavilion, now enclosed with temporary walls against the winter chill, and a festive dinner where residents shared family recipes and traditions. Greg called to invite me for Christmas Day. "Nothing fancy," he assured me. "Just family. The kids are excited to give you your presents." "I'd love to come," I said, truly meaning it. Would it be all right if I brought Frank? The children have been asking about him. There was only a slight pause before Greg replied, Of course, they'd like that. The acceptance of Frank's presence in my life felt like another small step toward healing our fractured relationship. I spent an afternoon shopping for gifts with Catherine, who had become a close friend in the months since my arrival. We navigated the crowded mall with strategic precision, comparing notes on grandchildren's interests and sizes. How are things with your son? She asked as we rested with coffee between stores. Any improvement? Gradually, I replied. It's not the same relationship we had before, but maybe that's not entirely bad. We're establishing something new, with more honest communication and clearer boundaries. And he's accepted Frank? I smiled at her directness. They're making an effort. Frank has been wonderful about it all, never pushing, just being his kind, steady self. He's quite smitten with you, Catherine observed. Anyone with eyes can see it. The thought warmed me despite the December chill. At 67, I hadn't expected to find romantic love again. Companionship, perhaps. Friendship, certainly. But the tender feelings growing between Frank and me had taken me by surprise. The feeling is mutual, I admitted, though it's all still new territory. Dating at our age feels different. Better in some ways, Catherine said. We know who we are by now. No games, no pretenses, just two complete people choosing to be together. Her framing of it resonated deeply. Not two halves making a whole, but two whole people creating something new together. On Christmas Eve, Frank took me to dinner at a small French restaurant in Cambridge, elegantly decorated with twinkling lights and fresh garlands. He seemed unusually nervous, adjusting his tie repeatedly and stumbling over words, behaviors I'd never observed in my normally composed companion. Is everything all right? I asked after he'd dropped his napkin for the third time. Perfect, he assured me, reaching across the table to take my hand. I have something I want to say, and I'm finding myself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. My heart quickened. Well, that makes two of us curious about what you might say. He smiled, visibly gathering himself. Judith, these past months have been the happiest I've known in many years. When I saw you that day at the library, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. I believe the life-changing was mutual, I said softly. I hope so. He squeezed my hand gently. Because I find myself, at 65, wanting to ask a question I never thought I'd ask again. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box and placed it on the table between us. I'm not proposing marriage, he clarified quickly. Not yet, anyway. That would be rushing things. But I am proposing something. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small pearl. This is a promise ring, he explained. A rather old-fashioned concept, I know. But I want to promise you that I'm committed to whatever this journey becomes. No pressure, no timeline, just my promise to walk alongside you wherever it leads. Tears welled in my eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. Frank, you don't need to answer now, he assured me. Take all the time you need. But I didn't need time. In the month since I'd met him, Frank had shown me nothing but respect, kindness, and genuine appreciation for who I truly was. He'd supported my independence while offering companionship. He'd seen me, really seen me, when I was accustomed to being overlooked. I don't need time, I said, extending my right hand. My answer is yes. Yes to your promise, yes to our journey, yes to possibilities I hadn't dared imagine. He slipped the ring onto my finger, his own hand trembling slightly. Around us, the restaurant continued its festive hum, but in that moment, there might as well have been no one else in the world. Christmas Day with Greg and family held its own surprises. The children greeted Frank like an old friend, Ethan immediately engaging him in conversation about a book on astronomy he'd received that morning, Madison showing off her new piano piece with unabashed pride. Greg and Vanessa, while not quite so effusive, made genuine efforts to include Frank in conversations and traditions. I noticed Greg watching us occasionally with a thoughtful expression, particularly when Frank and I exchanged small gifts after dinner. "I want to show Grandma my science project," Ethan announced as we finished dessert. "It's in my room." "I'll come too," Madison insisted. After they'd pulled me upstairs, Greg approached Frank in a moment I wasn't meant to witness, but glimpsed, from the hallway. "Thank you," I heard my son say, "for being there for her when we weren't, for seeing what we missed." Frank's response was too quiet to hear, but the brief handshake the two men shared suggested a new understanding. Later, as Frank drove us back to Riverside Gardens through streets decorated with holiday lights, I told him about the exchange. "Your son is trying," Frank said. "That's significant progress." "It is," I agreed. "I think seeing me happy helps him accept everything that's happened." I glanced down at the pearl ring gleaming on my finger. "And I am happy, Frank. Remarkably, unexpectedly happy." "Even after giving up your home of 40 years and starting over?" "Because of it," I corrected him. "Not the house itself. That was just a structure. But making the choice, standing up for myself, creating this new life. That's what brought me here. To Riverside Gardens, to my painting, to new friendships." I reached over to touch his hand on the steering wheel. "To you." He smiled, eyes still on the road. "Then I'm grateful for your courage, Judith Wilson. Every day." As we approached Riverside Gardens, the community's entrance was outlined in white lights, a welcoming beacon in the winter night. The sight filled me with a sense of homecoming I hadn't expected to feel so soon after leaving Maple Street. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" I asked as we parked. "I'd like that very much," he replied. Inside my condo, with the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner and carols playing softly from the stereo, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This space, these choices, this life, all mine in a way my existence in the basement never could have been. Frank helped me make coffee, moving around my kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. As we carried our mugs to the sofa, I was struck by how quickly the patterns of intimacy had developed between us. Each small ritual, the way he always added just the right amount of cream to my coffee, the way I automatically adjusted the throw pillows to accommodate his preference, speaking to a deepening connection. "I've been thinking," I said as we settled beside each other, the lights from the tree casting soft patterns across the room, "about the community art show." "And?" He turned toward me, interest warming his expression. "I'm going to submit 3 pieces: the Fountain at Sunset, the Autumn Trees series, and the one of the empty bench by the garden gate." "Excellent choices," he approved. "I'm particularly fond of the empty bench. There's something poignant about it, expectant somehow, as if it's waiting for someone to come along and appreciate the view." "That's exactly what I was trying to capture," I said, surprised and touched by his perception. The potential in emptiness, the promise of spaces not yet filled. "Rather like life itself," he observed, "especially at our age." "At our age," I repeated, considering the phrase that had once been used to limit me, to define what I could or should do. Now it felt different. Not a restriction, but a recognition of the particular gifts that came with decades of living. At our age, we had fewer illusions but greater wisdom. At our age, we recognized the preciousness of time, but also its abundance. At our age, we knew ourselves well enough to choose companions who truly saw us. "I've decided something else too," I told him, setting down my coffee cup. "I'm going to start teaching again. Not full-time, of course, but the community center needs someone for their adult literacy program. 2 evenings a week. You'll be wonderful at that, Frank said without hesitation. Those students will be fortunate to have you. His immediate, unquestioning support contrasted sharply with what my announcement might have elicited in the basement days. Questions about whether I was taking on too much, concerns about my availability for childcare, subtle reminders of my age. There's freedom in rebuilding your life, I mused. In a strange way, losing what I thought was permanent opened up possibilities I wouldn't have imagined. Frank nodded thoughtfully. There's a Japanese concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The idea is that the piece becomes more beautiful and valuable because it's been broken and mended, not despite it. I like that, I said softly. The breaks become part of the beauty. Exactly. He touched the pearl ring on my finger gently. And sometimes what emerges from the breaking is stronger than what came before. As we sat together in the gentle glow of Christmas lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the basement grandmother, cutting herself out of family photos, to this woman reclaiming her talents, her dignity, her capacity for love and growth. The house on Maple Street was now someone else's home. The power others had held over me was gone, relinquished through my own decisive action. What remained, what continued to grow, was the essential Judith, no longer defined purely by relation to others, but standing firmly in her own right. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the balcony with delicate white. Frank noticed it first, gesturing toward the glass doors with a smile. Your first snowfall at Riverside Gardens. I moved to stand at the doors, watching the transformation of the familiar landscape. Frank joined me, his arm slipping naturally around my waist. Together we stood in comfortable silence, witnessing the gentle erasure of what had been, the beautiful blank page of what might come next. Merry Christmas, Judith, Frank said quietly. Merry Christmas, I replied, leaning against him slightly. And happy new beginnings. Spring arrived at Riverside Gardens with an explosion of color that took my breath away. The daffodils I'd planted in my small garden plot pushed through the last patches of snow, and the fountain sparkled in the strengthening sunlight. As I sat on my balcony with my morning coffee, I marveled at how completely my life had transformed in less than a year. The community art show had been more successful than I'd dared hope. 2 of my watercolors sold on opening night, with the buyer specifically requesting information about commissioning a larger piece. The validation of my work by strangers who valued it for its own merit rather than out of familial obligation felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. My adult literacy classes at the community center had become the highlight of my week. Working with Maria, a grandmother from El Salvador learning to read English to help her grandchildren with homework, and Robert, a 70-year-old former mechanic pursuing his GED, reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. The joy of watching comprehension dawn in someone's eyes never got old. Frank and I had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. He'd officially moved into the unit next to mine, keeping his own space while sharing much of our daily life. We'd discovered we both loved sunrise walks around the gardens, terrible romantic comedies from the 1990s, and cooking elaborate Sunday dinners for whoever wanted to join us. My relationship with Greg and his family had found its new equilibrium. They visited monthly now, genuine visits rather than obligatory check-ins. I attended Madison's piano recitals and Ethan's soccer games, but as a welcomed guest rather than expected help. The boundaries we'd established benefited all of us. They valued my presence more because it wasn't taken for granted, and I enjoyed their company more because I chose to be there. On a particularly beautiful April morning, as Frank and I returned from our walk, I found Greg's car in the visitor parking area. Unusual for a weekday and without advance notice. My first instinct was worry. Was someone sick? Had something happened? I found him sitting on my front steps, dressed casually, in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual business attire. His expression was thoughtful rather than troubled, which eased my initial concern. "Greg? What brings you by so early? Is everything all right?" He stood as we approached, nodding to Frank with the easy familiarity they'd developed. "Everything's fine, Mom. Actually, better than fine. I took the day off because I wanted to talk to you about something important, and I didn't want to do it over the phone." Frank squeezed my hand gently. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, heading toward his own door. "Actually," Greg said, "I'd like you to stay, Frank. This involves you too, in a way." Intrigued, I unlocked my door and led them inside. The morning light streaming through my windows illuminated the watercolor I'd been working on the previous evening, a study of the gardens in early spring, with new growth emerging from winter's stark branches. "Coffee?" I offered, moving toward the kitchen. "Please," Greg replied, settling onto my sofa with an air of nervous energy. As I prepared the coffee, I noticed him looking around the condo, with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the polite assessment of our early visits, but genuine appreciation. "I've never really noticed before," he said when I handed him his mug, "how much this place reflects you. The colors, the arrangement, even the way the light falls across your paintings. It's very, you." "Thank you," I replied, touched by his observation. "It's the first home I've ever created entirely for myself. That's actually what I wanted to talk about." He set down his mug and turned to face me fully. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas, especially after seeing you with Frank, seeing how happy you are here." Frank and I exchanged a glance, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I realized something that I should have understood a long time ago," Greg continued. "When Dad died, I thought my job was to take care of you. But what I was really doing was trying to manage you, to make decisions for you based on what I thought was best, rather than what you wanted." I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This was the conversation I'd hoped for but never quite believed would happen. "Moving you to the basement wasn't about giving you privacy or your own space," he admitted. "It was about us taking over your life while making ourselves feel generous about it. And when you fought back, when you sold the house and chose this place, I was angry because you'd disrupted our plan for your life." "Greg, let me finish, please." He held up a hand. "I need to say this. I've been angry with you for almost a year, feeling like you'd abandoned us, like you'd chosen strangers over family. But watching you these past few months, seeing you paint and teach and build this new life with Frank, I finally understood what I'd been too stubborn to see before." He paused, looking out at the fountain through my balcony doors. "You didn't abandon us, Mom. You saved yourself. And in doing that, you saved our relationship too, because what we had before wasn't sustainable. It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't healthy for any of us." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I listened to my son finally understand what I'd been unable to explain in the heat of our confrontations. "I'm not just apologizing," he continued. "I'm thanking you for having the courage to stand up to us when we couldn't see what we were doing, for showing the kids what it looks like to live authentically, even when it's difficult, for demonstrating that it's never too late to choose your own happiness." Frank reached for my hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "There's something else," Greg said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I brought this for you." He pulled out a small framed photograph I recognized immediately. It was from Madison's birthday party, one of the shots where I'd been positioned at the edge of the group. But this wasn't the original photo. Someone had carefully cropped and reprinted it, placing me in the center, surrounded by my family, all of us smiling genuinely at the camera. Vanessa and I went through all our family photos from the past few years, he explained. We had them professionally restored and reprinted with you where you belonged, in the center of our family, not on the margins. I took the frame with trembling hands, seeing myself as I should have been all along, not an afterthought or convenience, but the matriarch of our family, valued and central to our story. "We want you to know," Greg continued, "that no matter where you live or what choices you make, you're the heart of this family. We may not see you every day anymore, but we think about you every day. The kids talk about Grandma Judith's condo and Grandma Judith's paintings and Grandma Judith's boyfriend, Frank." Despite my tears, I laughed at that. "Boyfriend Frank? Madison's terminology," he grinned. "She thinks it's very romantic." Frank chuckled beside me. "Smart girl." "There's one more thing," Greg said, his tone shifting to something more formal. "Vanessa and I have been talking about the future, about what we want to teach our children about family and respect and making choices." He leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "We want to ask if you'd consider letting us host Thanksgiving this year at our new house. Not because we need your help or expect you to cook, but because we want to honor you properly. We want the kids to see their grandmother celebrated the way she deserves to be." My heart swelled with a mixture of joy and healing I hadn't known was possible. This was the family I'd always hoped we could be, one where love was expressed through respect rather than expectation, where care was shown through honor rather than management. "I'd love that," I said, my voice thick with tears. "We'd love that." "We?" Greg asked, glancing between Frank and me with raised eyebrows. Frank and I looked at each other, and I saw in his eyes the same certainty I felt in my heart. "Actually," I said, reaching for Frank's hand, "we have some news of our own." Frank smiled, understanding my unspoken permission. "I asked your mother to marry me yesterday," he said simply. "And she said yes." Greg's face broke into the widest smile I'd seen from him in years. "Mom, that's wonderful. Frank, welcome to the family, officially this time." He stood to embrace us both, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, a hug with my son felt completely natural, unmarred by resentment or obligation. After Greg left, promising to bring the children by soon to celebrate our engagement, Frank and I sat together on my balcony in the strengthening spring sunshine. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, turning the simple engagement ring on my finger. "Marriage at our age, after everything you've been through?" "I'm sure," I replied, surprising myself with how completely I meant it. Not because I need someone to take care of me or because I'm afraid of being alone. I've proven I can manage both quite well on my own. "Then why?" he asked gently. I considered the question, watching the fountain spray its graceful arcs into the air. "Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing a partner as a complete person, not as someone who needs to be completed. Because we enhance each other's lives rather than trying to manage them. Because at 67, I've finally learned the difference between settling and choosing." Frank nodded slowly. "I love you, Judith Wilson. Not for what you can do for me or how you fit into my plans, but for who you are when you're most yourself. And I love you, Frank Daniels, for seeing that person even when I'd forgotten she existed." As the afternoon sun painted the gardens in shades of gold and green, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who had sat in a basement cutting herself out of photographs seemed like someone from another lifetime, though it had been less than a year since I'd made that desperate choice to reclaim my life. I thought about Vanessa's words from so long ago, how I was lucky to have family willing to manage my life for me. Now I understood that the real luck had been finding the courage to reject that management, to insist on my own agency even when it meant disappointing people I loved. The basement grandmother was gone forever, replaced by someone I was still discovering. Judith the artist, Judith the teacher, Judith the woman who chose love over convenience and authenticity over peace. At 67, I wasn't ending my story. I was finally beginning to write it properly, with my own hand, in my own voice, on my own terms. Frank reached for my hand as we watched the sun set behind the gardens, painting the sky in watercolor, shades I was already eager to capture on canvas tomorrow. "No regrets?" he asked, reading my contemplative mood. "None," I replied, meaning it completely. "Only gratitude for second chances and new beginnings." As darkness settled over Riverside Gardens, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life reclaimed, a story rewritten, and a future that belonged entirely to me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.